All right, all right. Oh, I forgot a couple of things, but I think you can hear me just fine. I usually like to have my ears on when I'm doing these lives. Um, okay, so I am, as you know, Dr. Maiysha, and it's Happy New Year, first of all. First and foremost, Happy New Year 2022. It's been an interesting last 2 years, and it looks like we're coming into 2022 with an interesting start. And so, before we before we exited 2021, I did a series about setting goals. And we talked about like evaluating the end of the year, evaluating your accomplishments, setting goals for the new year, and not resolutions, but goals and visions and intentions. However, as we come into a new year, a new space, new beginnings, it's useful to talk about what goes into creating these intentions. Happy New Year to you too. What goes into creating these new intentions? And I have, several colleagues of mine, coaches, one of which I had on my podcast recently, Dr. Serene Sharif, and she talks about habits. And a couple of other people in my professional circles talk about habits. And I think it's important to talk about habits. But I'd like to focus on, for the next few sessions that I come on, because I am going to be doing a series over the next few weeks to talk about the things that go into creating the habits, which is the thought habits. One of the things that we don't often focus on when we're focusing on habits is the thought habit. And the thought habits actually come before the physical in the world habits. And I say that because there's a certain way that we perceive goals and visions and outcomes that we're creating, and how we perceive those things will give us our behavior, our expectations, and therefore our outcomes. And so it's really important to begin if we're talking about new beginnings, begin the year talking about the thought habits that we already hold, and how to begin to look at shifting those thought habits to shift the outcome. So, a lot of times when we set these goals, we have an expectation of whether or not we're going to succeed. We already have an already always way of being and thinking, and about whether that goal is going to be easy, whether it's going to be hard, whether our ability to sustain an action, and those thought habits give us a particular view. And so, one of the things we can begin to look at right off the bat is, how are we thinking about the things that we're putting in our future? So at the end of the year, if you haven't watched my live streams that I've done, or my previous episodes I've done, where I talked about end of the year review, and then we did immediately after that an exercise to put goals into the future. So after you put a goal into the future, obviously you're going to have the pathway to get to whatever that goal that you're putting into the future. So now, how are you thinking about that? How are you thinking about, what are your already always thoughts about that particular goal that you put in the future, or the goals that you set in the new year, in this new beginning? What are your thought habits, your thoughts about the year already? A lot of we've been through a lot. We're still going through a lot, especially with the upswing of COVID once again. There's so many already always ways of thinking that are probably going through one's head. And so we need to be mindful of that, because it'll drive our behavior. So the first question I have is, what are you already thinking about this year? And when I say about this year, you could look at it from the context of, what are you already thinking about this year in terms of your personal life? What are you already thinking about this year in terms of your business, your finances, your relationships? But also, what are you already thinking about this year, about how it's going to go? How it's going to go. Right? What are your expectations that are there already? And what are you already concerned for or worried about? Right? Because what we focus on, where we put our focus, tends to be we end up seeing the most of, which will create a perpetual cycle of thinking and could take us down a rabbit hole um, into unresourceful thought habit. And so, have you already decided about the year? Decided about the future of your finances this year? Decided about the goals that you set? And you may have decided that they're going to happen. And if that's the case, then that's amazing. And, you know, you can continue to listen to get more tips, or you could, pause now. But what I want to share with you is that if you're already having some doubts, any doubts at all, then this is a habit that you want to begin to look at breaking right away. And there are several ways that we go about breaking habits. Thought habits, that is, unresourceful thought habits. When I work with my clients, when I teach in my trainings, we talk about the origin of the thought habit. And that's one of the major ways that you begin to break a habit, is to get the origin of where it is in the first place. So when you start to think about, where did this thought come from? What is it based on? And a lot of times we do base our thoughts and our predictions, because they're predictions, on past experience. And it's not inherently wrong to do that. However, it is useful to know that past experience doesn't always dictate the future. Right? Now, sometimes it can, all right, but we have the power, and we don't realize how much power we have to shift the direction of our lives, the direction of our outcomes, simply by how we think and the direction of our thinking. So I'll give you an example. Someone who wants to, let's say, increase their income. If you're thinking about what you don't want, then what you're focused on is the poverty, or the struggle, or the grind, or whatever it is that you don't want. So you're not actually looking towards the opportunities that could actually get you what you want. So the thing would be to shift the habit from thinking and focusing on about what you don't want to happen, to begin to shift the focus on what you do want to happen. And what happens is, when you begin to shift the focus toward what you want, then your brain starts to look for those things. All right. So that's one of the ways that you shift the thought habit. The other way is, you can shift thought habits by actually reframing. We're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail, right? Because a lot of times we make our own meaning of a circumstance. We take something that's happened, and then we add, we equalize it to something else, to some type of meaning. And so let's take failure, for example. If you don't achieve a goal by a certain date, that means one has failed. That doesn't necessarily mean that. But a lot of times we will equivalate not achieving a goal by a certain date to being a failure. And so one of the things we'll talk about is how to shift context and shift meaning in the moment, so that you can redirect your thought habits back towards what you want, rather than slipping back into old behavior of what you don't want. Okay. And then another way that you can begin to rapidly shift thought patterns and thought habits is by setting yourself what's called an anchor. It's a little neurological reminder. And I don't know if you remember, but some time ago, I actually did this process right here on a live. We did this together. And so I will show you again how to do that in a few weeks. Again, this is coming up. So today really is sort of an introductory to what we're going to talk about. But what I want you to really get today is that the thoughts, that the habits, your habits of thinking really do drive the perception and therefore your expectation and your behavior. And so when we begin to really more deeply look at these habits, then we can begin to shift them. And it is a journey, and that's why I call them thought habits, because our brain is always going, right? Our brain is just always processing. Thoughts are coming up here and there and everywhere. And when we become conscious of our thoughts, it takes practice. This takes daily practice, moment to moment practice. Some people call it mindfulness. That's essentially what it is. And so we want to begin to practice on a daily basis, becoming aware of the thoughts, not only the thoughts that are coming up, but also what we're doing with that thought. We want to begin to practice how we language our thoughts, right? These are all habits that we're building. But the first part of that is when we notice a thought, what do we do with it? How do we begin to shift it? Because if we can shift it before that thought exits our mouth in language, then we actually have a lot more power, especially when we're speaking and interacting with others. And so I was talking with a friend of mine today, actually, and I noticed that out of her mouth came a lot of, she habitually self-deprecates, and it's not a conscious thing. I don't think that she does, but I just noticed it, and I just asked her, "Hey, can you be aware of you being hard on yourself linguistically?" And of course, there's always a thought that comes before the speaking. So, high performing professionals, high performing people, we tend to be very hard on ourselves, which means whether it's intentional or not, whether it's subtle or overt, there are many times that we're beating ourselves up in language or in thought. And that's one of those thought habits that we need to be mindful of, because it doesn't do our confidence any good, especially when we're trying to put forth intention for these goals for these New Year's. It doesn't do our confidence any good if we're beating ourselves up in thought. So that's one thought habit that you can begin to look at and catch in the moment. And that's what this is all about. Right? It's not going to become perfect overnight, because however old you are, that's how many years of practice you've had thinking the way you think. But what it can do is it can bring what's in the darkness into the light. And you can begin to notice and catch yourself, and in the moment correct yourself. And some of the techniques that we'll talk about over the next couple of weeks will be a good way for you to easily reframe and give yourself even physical reminders, anchors, all right, of changing that thought pattern. We call them pattern interrupts. Okay, so that's really all I wanted to talk about today. Brief and to the point, but really an introduction to what we're going to be doing over the next few weeks, which is shifting thought habits. And there, like I said, are a couple of ways. One is to get at the roots of the thought habit, that is the belief that precedes the thought habit, and begin to change the belief, right? Eliminate the negative belief, eliminate the limiting belief, and then replace it with the belief that you want to have, or the intention that you want to have. Okay. The second is the moment to moment reframing. So by the way, the first tactic that I talked about, the changing of the belief, that's a process. Right? That's a process that you do, with each belief. And that's more of a deeper process. And it's really the most effective, because when you begin to reframe or really like eliminate the negative belief and the negative emotions underneath the thought habit, then it actually changes the habit instantaneously at the unconscious level, right? It changes the thinking and the belief, and therefore it helps to really dissolve the habit. But what you can do moment to moment to be practicing are the techniques that I'll talk about, the reframing and the anchoring, the giving yourself the reminder of. Because like I said, the brain is always doing what the brain is doing. And unless you're really doing a lot of unconscious mind shifting and change work, then the brain is going to just do what it continues to do. And it's going to do it. And you have to bring that unconscious to the conscious to be able to shift and change that. So the second thing would be reframing, and the third thing would be the anchoring, which would be the physical reminder, physical on your body or physical in space that you can go to that will always serve as that reminder of your best self or your best thinking or that intention that you're setting. And we'll talk about those. So if you want to know more about the work that I do with neuro-linguistic programming, you can easily just, if you're here with me on Instagram, click the link in the bio. You can schedule a free discovery call if you want to do deep personal work. If you are someone who does transformational work or coaching with others and you want to learn the tools to be able to do this work with others, then you can, look at coming to one of our trainings. We have one in January, we have one in April, and they're right here in Atlanta. If you're in an organization and you feel like the mindset of the organization, the culture of the organization needs a mindset shift, a cultural mindset shift. If you are interested in the work, how I bring emotional intelligence and communication intelligence and mindset shifts into the diversity, equity, inclusion space, then feel free to reach out to me directly by email or messaging on the platform. That's what I meant to say. Email me via the platform. So with that said, I will be seeing you all next week where we're going to start first to talk about the belief change process, because that's really the most, the deepest way, the most effective way to get at the very root of these limiting beliefs, of these thought habits, is to really start to change the belief underneath that. So we're going to talk about that first. Then we'll go on and talk about the other couple of things that you can do on a day-to-day basis to maintain that habit. Okay? You all, I hope you all are having a great start to your new year. Remember, mind your thoughts. Okay? Be mindful of your thoughts. Start to catch yourself. Start to listen to the words that are coming out of your mouth. Start to listen to the thoughts that are going through your head. Start to catch yourself when you are beating yourself up mentally. Start to listen to the words that are coming out that are covertly self-deprecating, that are covertly being harder on yourself than you need to be, right? Start doing that now, because it's going to prime you. And start thinking about where these beliefs come from, because we're going to prime you for next week. Start to think about when you hear yourself beating up on yourself, where does that come from? When is the first time I started doing that? All right, so start thinking about that now. And when we bring a belief that you want to change next week, if you want to, I'll be here Tuesday around the same time as always, and bring a belief that you want to change. And we will do a little process. I'll share a little about it, and then we'll do a specific process to begin to help you change that belief. Okay? Have a great one. You know where to find me if you need me personally as a coach or if you want to hear more about the trainings. And I look forward to seeing you next week.